The first impression asks for no explanation. It simply happens. Before any context, before any idea of travel or isolation, what appears is physical presence. Ancient stone fitted with silent precision, incredibly clear water cutting through the valley with an almost mineral coldness, and an almost total absence of continuous human noise. There is no constant traffic, no eye-catching facades, no visible signs of urgency. The village does not announce itself. It does not welcome. It remains. The buildings feel heavy, solid, as if they were placed there not to last decades, but centuries. Each wall suggests a practical logic. Each narrow passage indicates that the space was never designed for fast flow, but for repeated, familiar, almost memorized steps. The silence is not absolute, it is structured. There is the sound of water, the wind touching uneven surfaces, occasional footsteps that echo briefly and disappear. Nothing competes for attention. Nothing tries to be noticed. At first glance, this feels strange because it does not seem prepared for observation. There is no effort to look untouched. There is no attempt to look old. What you see is a place that did not adapt to the modern gaze, and that is exactly why it makes an impact. A space where the present did not visually impose itself, where the current rhythm of the world seems to have arrived only up to a certain point and stopped. Here, the immediate sensation is not beauty in the touristic sense, it is density. It is the clear impression that this place exists according to its own rules, and that the visitor has just entered a system that was not made for them. After the initial impact, the strangeness begins to organize itself. It stops being purely sensory and becomes functional. What makes this place different is not something extraordinary, but precisely controlled repetition. The houses follow similar proportions, built close to one another, not for aesthetics, but for necessity. The streets are narrow because they have always been. There was never a real reason to widen them. Space here was never abundant enough for excess. The rhythm is imposed by the environment, not by human will. Movement is short, predictable, done on foot. There is no structural hurry because nothing was designed to accommodate it. Every path suggests that the time needed to cross it was accepted long ago. The village feels strange because it operates on a reduced scale. Everything happens close by, contained, compact. Daily life does not spread out, it concentrates. This concentration creates a constant sense of pause, as if the place were always between one moment and the next, never rushing toward the following one. There is no excessive signage, no modern visual layers competing for attention. Information here is minimal because the space does not depend on it to function. Those who live at this rhythm do not need constant guidance. Routes and habits are known, repeated, almost automatic. This practical strangeness does not come from absolute isolation, but from the absence of recent adaptation. The world around it accelerated, multiplied functions, expanded flows. This place did not. It remained faithful to an old logic, efficient enough not to need replacement. And it is precisely this silent, almost invisible efficiency that makes everything feel out of place to someone arriving now. The strangeness begins to make sense when the place stops being merely observed and starts being located. The village is set into a narrow valley surrounded by mountains that function not as scenery, but as limits. Here, the land never offered wide choices. From the beginning, it determined where one could build, where one could pass, how much sun would arrive, how much land could be cultivated. Nothing was decided by convenience, everything was decided by possibility. This settlement did not arise to be beautiful, nor to be visited. It emerged because this specific point offered the essentials: access to water, relative protection from harsher weather, and a viable connection with other communities in the valley. It was enough, never more than that. The buildings near the river are not a visual whim. They exist there because the watercourse was always the axis of survival, providing energy, irrigation, food, and spatial orientation. The village grew by obeying this axis, adjusting itself to the terrain instead of trying to dominate it. Isolation is not a modern concept applied retroactively. It has always been part of the equation. For centuries, access was difficult, especially in winter. This shaped a mindset of practical self-sufficiency, where every decision had to work even when the outside world was temporarily inaccessible. Nothing here is accidental. The position, the density, the shape of the village are direct responses to an environment that does not allow prolonged improvisation. The place exists exactly where it is because anywhere else in the valley, existing would have been harder. And when this is understood, the village stops looking frozen in time. It begins to look precisely placed, as if it were still doing exactly what it always did, occupying the only possible space in the only viable way. Even after being understood, the place still feels displaced from contemporary reality. And this happens not because of mystery, but because of absolute visual coherence. Stone dominates everything, not as a detail, but as a language. Walls, streets, and bridges share the same texture, the same mineral tone, creating a uniformity the modern eye no longer recognizes as normal. In current cities, each era leaves a visible mark. Here, time does not overlap, it sediments. Light contributes to this sensation. Reflected by the clear river water and absorbed by the irregular stone surfaces, it creates soft contrasts, never aggressive. Nothing shines excessively, nothing asks for emphasis. The result is a setting that feels permanently balanced, as if it were always the same moment of the day. Visual silence also plays a central role. There are no signs, exposed wires, industrial colors, or artificial surfaces breaking the field of view. The absence of visible modern elements makes the brain search for references and find none. This generates the feeling of unreality. The place looks old but not aged. It looks simple but not abandoned. This combination is rare. In most of the world, the old survives as ruin or as a restored attraction. Here, it survives as continuous use. The houses are not preserved to be seen, they are maintained to keep functioning. And this silent functionality is what most unsettles. Nothing here feels staged because nothing was organized to be observed. The visual effect is born from permanence, not from aesthetic intention. And perhaps that is exactly what makes the place feel almost unreal. It does not try to represent the past. It simply never needed to abandon it.
The appearance of quiet hides a system that demands constant attention. Nothing here maintains itself. Behind the stone facades and the sense of permanence, there is continuous, often invisible work that prevents the place from becoming merely an image of the past. Maintenance is not sporadic or outsourced. It is part of daily routine. Walls are reinforced, roofs adjusted, paths cleared. Small interventions, repeated over time, replace large renovations. There are also clear rules, even if barely perceptible. What can be altered, what must remain, how to build, how to repair. These limitations do not exist to preserve an aesthetic, but to ensure that the whole remains functional in an environment that does not tolerate prolonged neglect. The relationship with nature is not romantic. The river, so serene at first glance, demands respect. The seasons bring changes in volume, intense cold, constant humidity. Each construction was designed to endure, not to impress. Visual balance exists only because structural balance is an absolute priority. What the visitor does not see are the concessions: less space, less modern comfort, less flexibility. Living here means accepting clear limits in access, in climate, in resources. Beauty arises precisely from this silent acceptance. Nothing seems improvised because improvisation here has a high cost. The stability that is visible is the result of discipline, repetition, and accumulated knowledge passed down from generation to generation. When this is understood, the place stops seeming simply preserved. It begins to be seen as actively sustained, every day, even when no one is watching.
From a distance, the village seems to offer permanent tranquility, almost effortlessly. Up close, that tranquility reveals its conditions. The image that attracts, silence, slowness, simplicity, is often interpreted as comfort. But for those who live here, it is first and foremost a consequence. Daily life includes long winters, periods of more intense isolation, practical limitations that do not appear in the first images. Not everything is available all the time. Not everything can be solved quickly. A calm rhythm does not mean absence of demand. It demands planning, anticipation, a conscious relationship with time. Services are less frequent, choices are reduced, and dependence on the environment is constant. When something is missing, there are no immediate alternatives. The village does not easily adapt to modern improvisation, and that redefines what comfort means. For the visitor, the lack of stimuli feels liberating. For the resident, it is normality. The difference between expectation and reality lies in duration. Spending a few hours here suggests escape. Staying reveals commitment. Daily life does not offer constant distraction, but it offers continuity. Days resemble one another not because of monotony, but because of stability. The place does not promise ease. It offers predictability, something increasingly rare in the modern world. And it is at this point that the image begins to transform. What seemed like a temporary refuge reveals itself as a long-term choice, with clear costs and equally clear benefits. In the end, this place does not impose itself as an answer. It remains as a presence. Nothing here asks the world to change. Nothing demands a return to the past. The village simply continues to exist in the way it always has, and in doing so, creates a contrast impossible to ignore. While everything around accelerates, expands, and reinvents itself, this space remains faithful to a clear, limited, sufficient logic. Perhaps it is not disconnected from the modern world. Perhaps it is the modern world that has disconnected from places like this. What lingers is not the image of stone, water, or silence, but the feeling that time can be lived differently, not as something to be conquered, but as something to be accompanied, a rhythm that does not promise more, but promises to endure. If this place made you pause for a few minutes, perhaps it was not by chance. Perhaps there is something here we are still trying to remember. If this story made you reflect, follow the channel. Share this video with someone who misses silence, and allow other places like this to continue being seen, not as attractions, but as ways of living that still endure. Because sometimes observing calmly is already a first step toward changing the pace.